Thank you, gentlemen, for making time this afternoon. I know it's amongst the last few panels of the day, so energy levels are starting to drain, but hopefully we'll bring it all up. And I do see these bean bags here, which are very tempting, so our challenge would be to make sure all of you folks are still awake by the end of this panel. So anyway, so getting on to today's topic for now, there's a lot that's been talked about cloud and AI and big data, and now even quantum. Over the last few years, it's been tweeted about and blogged and written. But really, this discussion, we're going to try and focus on what's real and what's hype, and how do we get past that. So with that, I'm really going to ask you, Gregor, to maybe spend a few minutes just in terms of the maturity of some of the cloud services out there, particularly as they relate to data and to AI, and what you're seeing from your perspective.
Great, yeah. So short answer is yes, it's real. The long answer is we live in really, really exciting times, right? So we see all the technology vendors here, all the things that we announce. And to me, there's a couple of interesting nuances around it. The technology evolution is rarely linear, right? They always tend to have a very much of a tipping point kind of function, especially when you have multiple trends coming together, right? That's why we often talk about cloud, we talk about machine learning, we talk about AI, maybe IoT, and many of the other things in context, right? And that's not about collecting buzzwords. It is really about all these things have a connection, and a reason that we see such a rapid innovation at one point in time, because in unison, they reach a certain tipping point, right? You suddenly have the compute power available at your fingertips, right? That's what the cloud brings to you. You have the analytical capabilities that the machine learning brings, and you have the data, either through your direct channels, or the web, through mobile or IoT. So there's a reason that all these pieces interconnect, and that's what makes this happen. Now, the interesting part is that these are not evolutionary technologies, right? We always had computer, we always had some analytics kind of things. The sum of it makes it really transformative. And what I see from my perspective is that we're now at the point where we have so much of this technology at our fingertips that in order to really harvest the benefit of this technology, you need to start to work and think differently in the organization. And the folks who don't do that, the organizations who have a hard time, who see this just as a technology adoption, who see this as an IT procurement, and not as a lifestyle change. I always say cloud is not an IT procurement, it's a lifestyle change, it's a mindset change. The organizations who do get that, they will really reap fantastic benefits. There's so many cool things we can do with this. But at the same time, the organizations who don't get that this is more than just a technology transition, they run the risk of investing a lot of money and a lot of resources, but will likely not have the benefit. So fantastic times, right? These technologies all come together, and it's about understanding that this changes what IT means in your organization fundamentally.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, again, because cloud is often looked at a way to redefine how technology is delivered in the future. But I guess let me turn to you for a second here, Patrick. And from your vantage point, how do you see within financial services and banking in particular some of these technologies being adopted and the challenges around adopting them?
Specifically for cloud?
Cloud in particular.
Look, I completely agree that the world is multimodal, and what we see from a cloud perspective is that more and more companies are moving towards a hybrid and multimodal cloud, where there's not only different deployment capabilities from private, on-prem or public, but also multiple topologies from IaaS, container as a service, cloud native, and SaaS. And that's the reality. I think we're still in an infancy in terms of that multimodal cloud, because we're doing a lot of work with regulators, especially in Europe, about cloud adoption. The key element is coexistence between these different implementations, because as a bank, irrespective if your workload runs in your own data center or is on the public cloud, you're still responsible for that workload. And how do you manage a multimodal, probably an increased complexity in a consistent way? And there, I think there's a lot to do, and I'm talking about the monitoring aspects, the cyber aspects, the operational dimensions. So how do you manage that in a multimodal cloud environment? I don't think there's yet a solution out of the box, neither from the hyperscale vendors as from the software vendors. There's a lot of evolution towards open standards and things as container as a service, and I think that's certainly a technology which will increase in importance significantly. In fact, if you want to live in a multimodal cloud, you will probably not go for an IaaS capability. You want to increase the stack, you want to decrease complexity. But I think this is something that's still early days to manage that multimodality. But with the technology that we see, especially as I mentioned, container capabilities, I think we'll move towards that. Yeah.
So I guess, picking up on that a little bit and over to you, Evangelos, I would really like to understand how you think about the maturity of the public cloud particularly, because there's been a lot of talk, particularly amongst the banks, about the challenges they've still had around security and regulation and data privacy. And while progress has been made, how do you see that? And do you see sort of a path to addressing some of those?
Yeah, look, I think it's there are clearly challenges that need to be navigated as we implement it, but that's the case with every new technology. I don't think the cloud is particularly unique, and it's certainly maturing at a very, very high speed. And while it might seem like there's a lot of choice out there in terms of whether you adopt the cloud or not, and then if you do that, what type of cloud, like are you on the public cloud, are you on the private cloud? In reality, at least for an enterprise, there's not much of a choice. The economics of cloud are inescapable, right? Cloud is just going to be extremely cheap over time, and there's just no way we're going to be able to avoid that or replicate that. At the same time, if you're an enterprise, you already have a large ecosystem of internal systems that you've built over the years. So you can't just go full public cloud. You can't avoid the cloud. So you're going to end up in a situation where you've got some stuff inside and some stuff outside, and that's just the reality of it. So I think to answer your question, I think, yes, there are challenges that we'll have to navigate, but it's just something we'll have to do. It's inescapable.
Yeah. So maybe a quick comment. This mimics very much the conversations I have. So it's definitely no longer about are we going to the cloud, because it's solely about how do we get there. The other comment, to what Patrick alluded was that maybe a year or two ago, people had the notion that hybrid cloud is sort of an advanced version of going to the cloud, right? If you a little bit further ahead, you can start thinking about hybrid. What many of our customers are realizing now, all enterprise cloud scenarios are hybrid scenarios, because invariably you will have some things on premise, at least for the time being, while you're in the migration. You're not just going to wake up tomorrow and everything will be in the cloud. So while you're in the transition phase, at the minimum, you're going to be in a hybrid scenario. So a lot of the strategy that we're driving is exactly around making sure that while you have some pieces over here on premises and some pieces over there in the cloud, that we don't do sort of the classic mistake IT tends to make, which is you add always one more piece, right? The way IT became so complex is because, well, it wasn't so bad, so we added one more piece and one more piece and one more piece, right? So that's not what we like to do. A hybrid cloud doesn't mean having some stuff over here and some stuff over there. It means having a uniform management layer, right? So that's the containers, Kubernetes, these kind of stories around it, which are core part of the strategy. And the key thing is that you get a unified management and operations around it while you're making that choice and while you're making that transition.
And I would like to add to this that cloud adoption, any technology adoption we have seen in the past, most of them failed because they were only partial. They addressed a certain percentage of your estate, but the rest of the estate stay where it was. So if you want to be successful in cloud, and I've been 30 years in banking technology, and I've seen many of these disappointments, cloud, I think, is the first technology where we can manage coexistence between multiple technologies. It's quite important. But it needs to happen at scale. If it is only done at the boundaries of your ecosystem for your client-facing functions or your big data analytics or whatever, it will not get the impact that we're hoping from it. So how do you do cloud at scale? And that's also where I think all three parties play a very important role. The regulators, and we'll come back to that point later maybe, where they need to realize that cloud is global, so localization of regulations is anti-cloud. The second thing, the CSPs, who need to understand that the world is hybrid and we need to evolve more towards standards so that we have indeed cloud switching capabilities and data portability. And third, the banks. The banks themselves, because if you have an estate, Credit Suisse is about 3,600 business applications. How do you move such an estate at scale into the cloud? How do you prepare yourself? Moving an old-fashioned application into the cloud doesn't solve anything. You need to make it cloud ready. Doesn't need to be all cloud native. That's how you build your 12-factor type of applications, where you build your new applications. But the reality is that most of our applications are not 12-factor. So what do you do to basically prepare them for that transport into the cloud? And that's where container technology, of course, comes into place.
Yeah, building on that, Gregor, you've talked a lot about enterprise architecture and the role that plays in driving the right decisions architecturally, choices, etc. So can you spend a few minutes just on that? I think it'd be quite interesting.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a dangerous topic for me because that's where a lot of my passion lies. Like, I believe in scenarios of fundamental transformation like we see it with cloud and AI, that architecture plays a really, really important role. And that's for a couple of reasons. Number one is, with so much new technology coming around, it is really important that you have an IT strategy, that you decide which trade-offs you're going to make, right? So there will be trade-offs like lock-in. You might be able to buy a proprietary version of something that gives you an advantage but locks you in for a certain amount of time. Can drive enormous top-line opportunity. In other things, you want to have an open platform. You want to have the flexibility, right? That is architecture. And that is something you need to do in-house, right? This is not something a vendor can do for you, because you need to take your stance. You need to have your architecture and technology strategy, right? And that's number one reason why this is so important. Otherwise, you will always be chasing the next shiny object and get nothing done. The second reason architecture, and particularly the enterprise architecture, is so important is, we said before, cloud is not just technology, it's about having a different lifestyle and different mindset. And the key part of that lifestyle is that the role of IT has changed fundamentally, right? Much of enterprise IT used to be there to make the things that we already did cheaper and easier, right? It was like a pure delivery. The business had the demand, and IT would deliver largely things that were already in place. Now, in the digital world, there's a whole different expectation for the IT, right? It's rather than just optimizing existing processes, you're now looking to drive new opportunities, right? You're looking to discover, to disrupt, to innovate, right? And now this connection between technology and business that fuels that, I believe, has a huge architectural component, right? The architects are the people who can often, make the buzzwords kind of go away and abstract a little bit from the technology without losing the content, and finding the connection to the business opportunities, and making sure that business people understand some of the ramifications of the technical decisions, right? Because it's very dangerous if the IT makes one of those trade-offs and the business wasn't asked, or maybe doesn't understand, or wasn't really told what trade-off was made, because that's how these missed expectations happen that we see too often, right? So to accelerate and to succeed in this kind of world, that linkage is ever more important, and that's a second key reason why enterprise architecture plays such a critical role in this transformation.
Great.
If I can add to that, I was going to disagree with you, but then you said something that actually makes me agree now.
Okay.
So I was going to say, I think the lock-in trade-off is probably too big to be confined to architecture only, but then you said IT people need to be talking to business people, so I think I agree in the end.
Thank you.
But just to elaborate a little bit on that, that's, I think, one of the most fundamental decisions that we're going to have to make over the next few years. On one hand, you can opt to put your entire technology on one cloud, which allows you to take full advantage of the advanced capabilities of that cloud. For example, we're going to talk about AI later on. The AI capabilities in most clouds are pretty much cloud-specific, and they're drivers of competitive advantage for those clouds. So if you go all in one cloud, you can take advantage of those things, but then you're locked into the cloud. And you're facing risks and costs associated with lock-in. If you think about how many service providers we are dependent on in such a way that if the service provider was not serving you for a few hours, you'd be out of business. How many service providers do we have in that kind of category? Not many, right? This would be one of the biggest risks that would have to the whole operation. But on the flip side, it would allow us to your point, to exploit top-line capabilities and opportunities. So that's going to be a big one that we're going to have to navigate.
So we're at a financial event here, so the analogy I often give for making these architecture decisions is like options trading, right? Architecture sells you options. I'll give you a classic example, machine sizing, right? In the past, it used to be that when you want to deploy any kind of piece of software, you have a whole team that figures out how big the server should be, how big a piece of hardware you need to buy, and you know the sad answer is there's only two possible outcomes, right? Either too big or too small, right? Either you wasted money or your application doesn't perform. Now architecture, you mentioned like 12-factor applications, horizontally scaling, elastic provisioning that we have in the cloud, you now have an option, right? You can defer that decision, just like with financial options, you can now defer that decision, and deferring that decision has a value, but it also has a small cost, right? Maybe you need to architect your applications differently. Now, which of these options that the architecture team offers you, which of these options you should buy or not, is a really important decision, and that's what I think is the essence of the IT strategy, which cannot live independent of the business, and that's why your IT vendor can't do that for you either, because you need to have that connection with your business, and you need to make decisions. Now, not having to exercise an option doesn't mean it was a bad decision to buy it, right? We all know this, right? And likewise, right, not having bought it is also fine. It's just important you understand the decision parameters and you make a conscious choice and run with that. Because otherwise you get lost in all this stuff, all the buzzwords and all the technologies. But architecture is really like options.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to turn to you, Patrick, for a second in the same vein. A lot has been talked about financing or funding the transformation. And in your role as you're transforming the platform, for the bank, how do you think about funding that? Because transformation doesn't come for free. There's usually a hump cost involved with, driving that change, maybe even running multiple, infrastructures at the same time as you cut over. So, any thoughts on that?
Yes. Okay. We're coming for the last 3 years out of a major transformation. As you know, Credit Suisse, we are finishing that. Look, we're always living in a constrained world. And of course, as technologists, we want to have our change the bank budget going up year on year. But the reality is, this is always a little bit constrained. I think we have to change the model, and I hope that one day we will not talk anymore about run the bank versus change the bank. But basically, the trick is to reduce RTB as much as possible by, for instance, using AI or automation, intelligent automation across the complete franchise, front to back. And by using that automation or optimization technologies such as blockchain or big data, you make space for increasing your CTB capability. The second thing is the way you do change. Because we come from a world where you either were working in the run the bank or you were a change the bank person. Same as front versus back office. I think these terms, hopefully they disappear very soon. I don't think there's a front and back office, an RTB and a CTB. I think we all actively working to improve the customer experience and the efficiency and effectiveness of the organization. And that basically means that change needs to be done in a more agile, continuous way, continuous improvement, and especially with the adoption of DevOps, DevSecOps, where security is embedded in your DevOps pipeline. You hope that we can go to a world where we're constantly changing and improving our franchise without doing these big bang projects, typically what we did in the past. So that means that there will be, in fact, if you look at the level of automation that we see in front and middle and back, that basically commodity work will all be done by cognitive chatbots or AI capabilities. and that we free our workforce and upskill our workforce to do that, to be that change agent and do that transformation. Yeah. But you need to make that space.
Yeah, I think there's enormous savings potential. The challenge is the money is always spent when you're not looking, right? Anything that shows up on your budget, is hard to cut. Give you a concrete example, right? The most expensive server is always the one that's not doing anything, right? And you cut the cost by 20%, it's still a complete waste, right? Why do people have servers that are not doing anything? A, they don't know it. So intransparency is an enormous cost driver, right? People just have stuff that they don't even know they have it. They don't know what it's doing. Cloud brings enormous transparency, right? I did a major cloud initiative in an insurance company, and the biggest initial benefit we got was transparency. We could finally see, is the server being used? Is anybody accessing the application? Is anybody making updates? So that's huge cost saving, number one. And the second reason servers are not doing anything is because people are used to an IT model that is not automated. So let's say, what do you do in classic IT to make sure your service is always available? Right? Because a single server can easily fail. What do people do? They put a second server. And because hardware provisioning and software installation takes a long time, they do what we call a hot standby. That means the server gets installed, the software gets put on it, it gets configured, everything gets done, all the cost is incurred, except it never runs, because it's the standby, right? It's only the stand-in. So in order to maybe increase your uptime from, let's say, like 98 or 98.5%, which a single machine could do, to maybe 99.5% that you can get with two machines with a standby, so you increased availability by 1%, and you doubled your hardware and software cost. Now, you don't need to be a financial genius to realize that this is a very poor return on investment. And as Patrick is saying, with high levels of automation, if you can get a new server provisioned in 10 seconds, you don't need the standby, right? When the first one fails, in 10 seconds, you're back up and running, and there you go, and you cut your hardware and software cost in half. Yeah. And that's where the savings are.
Yeah. And you don't even have to do it on a server, because if you look at grid computing for Monte Carlo, where you have an X thousand cores, and you can extend your capacity by using compute power in your endpoints, is an easy way to reuse that capacity.
You can burst into the cloud.
And then you can burst in the cloud,
You know, on the flip side, and Evangelos, I'd love your view, a lot of our clients have found that with adoption of cloud, if they don't have enough governance in play, they also find that their spend is going in the wrong direction, because in general, developers are not used to working with a pay by the drink kind of a model, and if they're not careful, they can spin up stuff, and then it sits around, showing up in the invoice.
Yeah, that's true. And look, that has created an ecosystem of startups and solutions that are looking to solve that problem, right? Whereas 5 years ago, everybody was focused on how they're going to get us to the cloud. Now they're focused on higher quality problems like cloud governance and monitoring and performance optimization and so on, right? So that's true. But I just wanted to add to the previous point. I think the cost side of things is sort of interesting, but the other side of it is the availability, increasing availability as you move to cloud. If your availability model relies on infrastructure being available 100% of the time, which is what the hot standby model does effectively, you're going to be disappointed, because it's not. And the only way to reach a higher availability sort of outcome is to move to a software-based, to a container-based availability model. And availability, that 1% of availability, like from 98 to 99%, means that you're the only one who's up and running during a major storm or typhoon when everybody else is down. And guess what happens when you're the only one who's running? You eat everybody else's lunch, and you take their business away. So while it may sound like a small increment, it's actually really critical. So it's something we're very interested in.
Yeah, and that's why you shouldn't look just from an infrastructure perspective. I often advise customers, if you run your cloud initiative out of infrastructure and operations, which commonly happens, right? Because people look at cloud, oh, cloud has network, servers, storage, They look in the IT, who deals with this? Infrastructure and operations. Let's ask them to make a cloud initiative. That is probably the first big mistake you can make on the cloud journey. Right? It's not about infrastructure. It is about resilience and availability at the higher levels of the stack, and it's about software delivery that provides value to the business. So make sure your cloud initiative is not just looking at infrastructure. You will miss most of the opportunity.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And a lot of our clients, I think, have now matured to the fact that it's not about hosting, right? That if they look at it that way, they miss a huge trick. So on that note, maybe we switch gear towards machine learning and AI in particular and some of the higher order services. So I guess, Patrick, if I can turn to you, are there some emerging use cases in the AI space that the banks are looking at more than others?
Look, it's 2018. I started my career in '88 as an AI developer for AXA. So I have 30 years perspective on AI. And I think the world has changed a lot. I think there was a point of disillusion. I think we were all disillusioned after the year 2000, saying, is that it? But I think it's very mature now. And the reason why I think it's very mature is not only because we have the infrastructure, because in '88 we didn't have the CPU or the storage or the network capabilities we have now. But the second reason why I think it's very mature is not used anymore in an isolated fashion. In fact, we did this year about 90 AI projects in Credit Suisse. Most of them are a combination of technologies. It's not pure AI, most of them is a combination of with DLT or digitization capabilities or semantics or, it's always a combined pattern. And often integrated within the existing IT landscape. The third reason why I think it's very mature is that when I started at AXA, I was so-called the first knowledge engineer at AXA. And I had my special disk, I had my own special Lisp and Prolog machines, and there were the mainframe guys sitting. So now we don't make that. It's not anymore special. It's integrated in the workforce. Of course, we are hiring graduates from universities, but we're also discovering that these graduates that may have the best AI skills in the world, they don't understand banking, or they don't understand the IT landscape, or how we do IT in a bank. So upskilling our own workforce is very important, than embedding that capability. So I think it's very mature. It's used front to back. If I look at Credit Suisse, we're not a really retail organization, we're more a wealth manager and investment bank, but it's used in our wealth management business for providing avatars to our relationship managers to provide better portfolio management and investment advice. It's used in the investment bank for our investment bankers doing M&A deals and pipeline management. It's used in the corporate bank in reverse factoring. Give you not only in the front office but also in the back end. So efficiency is a big application of AI in terms of especially cognitive chatbots. Used in help desk or contact centers or anything where we can automate a lot, or in risk and finance, or even in cyber, or even in managing our own IT estate in terms of predicting outages of servers. So it's across the complete estate, and I think the combined usage of these exponential technologies is where the power is. Not a single usage. It means most often it's combined. And that's the reason why I think it's very mature, and that there's plenty of applications, possibilities there.
And what have you seen in your ability to be able to capture the value from AI, either to the top line or from a cost TCO perspective?
So look, there are multiple reasons. If I look at the estate that we are applying for this year, about 50% of our projects is related to improving client experience or improving front office capabilities. 20% of our projects are in the risk, compliance, cyberspace, and then 30% are in efficiency. And efficiency is primarily automating. In cognitive psychology, you have the 80-20 rule. That in 80% of the cases, people only use 20% of their know-how. So that's basically the type of problem they try to automate with cognitive chatbots. And then, of course, giving your people the opportunity to deepen their know-how further. So absolutely, it's very important to drive efficiency. But it's not only for efficiency, it's also for client experience and risk reduction and better security capabilities. Yeah.
Any comments on that, Evangelos?
I think that's a good summary. For us, protecting our clients is a major area of focus in terms of the use of AI. So we have a number of fraud prevention, fraud detection, cyber threat detection and prevention capabilities and pilots going on. We also see a lot of opportunities in efficiency, as Patrick mentioned. And we see opportunities in revenue generation as well, in providing better tailored solutions to our clients, and also in broadening access to our portfolio of capabilities. For example, we launched a product called MSAI, Morgan Stanley Access Investing, a few months ago, which is effectively a robo-advisor, which is heavily based on AI and machine learning. And the idea is to broaden our client base through these capabilities.
Yeah, we see an enormous uptake, especially with machine learning and AI, because it has a couple of really nice properties. The one thing is they tend to be what we call very bursty workloads, right? You want to crunch some numbers, you need a lot of compute capacity. Now having this on demand and only paying for it when you need it, the financials are just like unbeatable, right? It's just very attractive. The second reason is the machine learning projects, the AI projects, tend to have a short time to value, right? You gain insights, you can feedback, you can reiterate, so the time to value tends to be quite short, and that makes them very attractive. In terms of applications, I think it mirrors very much. We see sort of three broad categories. The one is optimization, right? This can be of processes. For us internally, it's our data centers. So like anything, we can basically tune the dials to minimize consumptions or minimize delay, right? Machine learning is really, really good at that because it doesn't have our human biases and it doesn't have our knack for finding causality where there isn't any, right? So machine learning finds usually much better ways to optimize it. The second one is prediction. Right? Prediction does many different things. So fraud is a prediction case, right? But prediction is also very nice because it can take friction out of a user interaction. Yeah, if you can understand the user's intent, if you can guess at what they're getting at, what they like to do, you can make the interaction much easier and much natural. And that's really the category number 3. Too many folks see machine learning, I always say, as analytics' older cousin. Right? If things on analytics is crunching some numbers and the machine learning is doing this a little bit better, again, that would be missing a big part of it. Machine learning, a lot of it is voice, vision, sensors, IoT, anything that makes interaction with the environment more seamless. So this starts with chatbots, it starts with call centers, it starts with customers being able to take pictures of something they have, people being able to draw the problem, right? So there we see a lot of really nice use cases because it is kind of heavy-duty technology. I mean, it's some pretty cool stuff, but in the end, you can use it to make people's life easier, and that always makes me very happy.
Yeah, we have a very interesting experiment we did a couple of years ago in Switzerland. We call it a diggy piggy. It's basically a piggy bank. You used to go to the bank, you got the piggy bank where you can put your money in. It's a digital device, it's an IoT device, and it's for kids banking in Switzerland, and it's linked to your account. And depending on your transactions that happens and your movement on your account, the device, the IoT device, gives certain expressions. And it's a really great example how we use AI, IoT, and a physical device that kids can play with. It was, by the way, the most popular Christmas present last year in Switzerland, to improve client experience for kids banking.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. So if you had any feedback for the cloud providers or even the fintech world that supports AI and services in that space, what would that be? What would you like to see more of, or how can they better engage with the banks as well as they help you in your AI journey?
So I think, first of all, we have to recognize that this is a journey, and things are getting better, they're not getting worse, so it'll take time. We'll figure out how to engage with each other, and it'll be a journey. For some of the smaller startups and smaller fintech companies out there who are interested in engaging with the enterprise, I would say be prepared for a bit of a long slog. We don't buy anything quickly. We test things to incredible lengths, and we take a lot of time, and you just have to live with that, unfortunately. think about things that you wouldn't normally think about if you're a startup, like authentication, integration with different types of databases. Like, there's a lot of not particularly exciting, but really necessary stuff that you'll have to do if you're going to sell to an enterprise. So come along for the journey. Be prepared for a bit of a long haul, and work with us as we help you think about those integration points. Is probably how I would summarize it.
And I would add to this that, look, innovation is always a collaborative game. Yeah, especially banking has become an ecosystem play. It is important that the banks and the fintechs work together to innovate. And we have quite a few successful examples like Suisse, where we embedded fintech solutions in our overall platform. But we need to do that together, yeah, because then we can leverage all the know-how and all the capabilities which are there, which we certainly can't do internally, and the world is too big. But it needs to be done in a collaborative way. And then you can be successful, yeah, as an industry.
So I know a lot of time is spent by the banks even dealing with data and regulation and data privacy by jurisdiction. So any thoughts about how you could work with the regulators differently, or is there expectations from the regulatory bodies across the world, as I know both of you deal with on a daily basis?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, especially for cloud, less for the other technologies. For cloud is by definition global. And if you look at the cloud regulation, a lot of regulators saying cloud equals outsourcing, which I do not agree with, because not all cloud is outsourcing. It's very difficult to implement a global cloud capability and leverage the advantages in a quite fragmented regulatory landscape. And therefore, what we would like to have is, first of all, a level of standardization of these regulations. Even very simple things about what is critical outsourcing or not, or how can we implement a level of proportionality to all the regulations in terms of cloud. So some level of standardization, because we need to be aware that, at the end of the day, it needs to be economically viable. And if the economical viability is not there, the adoption at scale will not happen. And the regulators need to understand that if it is too difficult, for instance, we operate in the European Union. EBA came out only a couple of months ago with guidelines for outsourcing and recommendations for CSPs. But then these guidelines and recommendations still need to be implemented in each country in the European Union, and you could end up with an even more fragmented landscape. So that's important. Now, there are positive, I see positive signs. I'm a member of the SWIPO group of the European Commission, which is working on a code of conduct for data portability and cloud switching, which we hope will be announced in December in Vienna, where we are defining, and it's a voluntary code of conduct with the CSPs and as yourself, and then of course with the users, not only banks, is a voluntary code of conduct where we're saying, okay, fine, if you declare adherence to that code of conduct for a certain service, these are basically the minimum requirements. We are hoping that this new code of conduct, which will have a governance too, will drive towards a more standardized world. Yeah, but it's early days.
If I can add a couple of things, I agree with everything that Patrick said. It's really important for us to know where the guardrails are before we get into using cloud or deploying cloud. Treating cloud adoption as a case-by-case kind of situation, bring it to us and we'll see. It doesn't work, it doesn't scale, it's too difficult, it's too slow, it's too cumbersome. We need to know where the guardrails are in advance, right? So that's number one. Number two is kind of a slightly broader point. If you look at how regulators receive data from us, how we interact with regulators, how we share data with regulators, in the year 2018, it's a process that's ripe for modernization, let's say. We use separate systems that are for reporting purposes only, and they generate reports, offline reports, that we then ship to the regulators, and they open the reports, and they look at all the data, and I don't know what to do with them. But that's not the best way of doing it, right? In the age of cloud, in the age of big data, in the age of APIs, surely there's a way for the regulators to give us APIs to use to share data with them and to put a little bit more thought into that part of how things work. And the MAS is actually showing some really good leadership in that space. So we'd like to see more regulators following that example.
But I also think that the banks should be more proactive. I'm the chair of the EBF Cloud Working Group, and we're currently working on one little topic, is about the cloud registry. Because a lot of regulators are asking for a registry. Now, but they're all asking for different type of registries. Would be nice to have a global registry. I say, okay, fine. If you're Maes or you're EBA or any whatever regulator, this is basically what we have in the cloud. So we're working on that specific topics about how can we define that global registry. And I think the banks should work together with the CSPs to drive more these standards and not sit and wait until the regulator comes up with a certain concept of idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe in the interest of time, we want to switch a little bit towards the topic of quantum. And maybe, Gregor, I'll turn to you around what you see around quantum and how far out are we from real use case and adoption in banking? And if you had a crystal ball, what would that look like?
Yeah, if I had the crystal ball, I might keep it to myself, right? But I'll answer your question. So obviously, we're heavily invested in quantum, and it's getting a lot of attention. There's a good reason for it. I preface it, though, with we have to be always careful with chasing the faraway shiny object provides a lot less business value than actually implementing things that you can buy or procure as a service right now. I've seen a lot of enterprises who engage in the shiny object, and it's almost like the further away the shiny object is, the harder it is to measure progress. So you can kind of get away with not making a lot. Very dangerous trap. I've seen that a lot. Don't do that. The reason, though, that quantum does, rightly so, get a lot of attention is that I feel we made the transition from, it used to be very experimental, right? And the way experiment goes, it goes left sometimes, it goes right sometimes. If you're really lucky, you make a step ahead or maybe not. What I think we have achieved to go from that mode into a mode where we make slow but steady progress. Right? There is a direction, there's incremental, noticeable improvement. And that's a huge step forward, right? You're going from sort of the nebulous, where is this thing, into making the baby steps where like, I think I know which direction it is, and every time I do something, I get a little bit further. So that's a huge step ahead. But it's a huge step ahead on a scale that still goes relatively far, right? So great news, right? At the same time, don't hold your breath, right? The use cases, like anything else, rarely come out of the single technology, and I think we touched on this in many of our discussions, right? The really interesting stuff, the tipping point comes where you put this together with other technologies you have, right? And I'd be lying if I was going to tell I know what those are, right? This might be, again, in the IoT space. This might be sort of in the blockchain-y distributed trust kind of space. But those things really just emerged, and I think we still have to be a tiny bit patient. That's not going to be 2019. This is going to have a little bit of a run-up.
Yeah, and
I think in terms of the question on whether we're going to see use cases in this lifetime, at the risk of providing the shortest answer of this panel, I think the answer is yes.
Lifetime, yes, hopefully.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully for our lifetime. I have no worries about
I'm confident,
the quantum.
yes.
Yeah, it will.
Yeah. Any predictions on what those may look like, or what would be some early use cases?
So anything that needs extreme parallel computing. The key question is how many problems do we have in banks, because we are banks, that requires, I'm not talking about 16 qubits or whatever, I'm talking about thousands of qubits. How many problems do we have in a bank that requires that type of processing power that we can't solve, for instance, by doing Monte Carlo, for instance, in the grid? Yeah. So I think, our complexity of thinking needs to involve the technology that we have available. Otherwise, we're going to solve pretty simple problems by extreme compute capabilities.
Yeah, that doesn't really make commercial sense. I think what's going to happen is, to your point, I think what's going to happen is there are problems that because we can't solve them today, we can't even go anywhere near.
Yeah.
So we don't think of them as problems because they're so far from being solvable that we don't even think about them. But as soon as quantum is real, I think those problems will come into the realm of the solvable, and then everything changes.
Yeah, and that's why I think the initial applications might not even be in financial services, like quantum is going to excel, like very complex simulations. This can be environmental, things that have a lot of data that are subject to complex rules, right? Making predictions, environmental kind of factors, safety for car simulations. I think that's where we're going to see a lot of it, and then it will trickle down. And yes, the idea of solving the same old problem just with fancier technology, we've done that plenty enough, so we should probably stop doing that. It will be an expensive hobby.
All right, so I think we've just got a few minutes for a few questions. So the first one, I guess, is, and interestingly, there are a number of votes on this one, is we're told cloud is safe. Is that true? And then are we just one outage or breach away from debunking the myth on cloud? So,
Gregor, what do you think?
Well, I think it's quite safe. Now, the real answer
the
on
vendor
this
says it's safe.
Yeah, so now I put my hand on it, it's fine. The catch is always, these things are not similar dimensions, right? If safety was a unilinear thing between safe and unsafe, a lot fewer consultants would be employed, right? The world isn't that easy. So if you think about safe in terms of cyber security, right? In most cases, cloud is actually more secure than what you can have on premise. And the simple reason for that is that the environment, the type of attacks you have, just have fundamentally changed. I often explain it this way. Cloud has the really nice property of making the economies of scale go away for the enterprise, right? You can buy a compute capacity by the hour for pennies, right? We eliminated the economies of scale for you as the cloud customer, but we have enormous economies of scale. And one of that is cybersecurity, right? So take Spectre and Meltdown, right? You have exploits in your CPUs. This is nothing you can solve with a walled garden around your data center, with a firewall, with physical security. It is in your data center, right? So those are the kind of attack vectors where in this case, because we have the economies of scale, the Google security researchers were part of the team who found these exploits and actually patched them before they were publicly announced. Now that is not anything you can do on premise. And because those are the kind of threats we deal with, like unfortunately, right? I'm not saying this is a good thing, but it's the reality, because those are the attack vectors you more often than not find that the cloud actually has a better defense against those than you could do on premise.
I'm shocked that you think that you're very secure. No, look, I think.
Are you convinced, though?
Look, I think it's important for users of cloud to be aware of what they're getting into, and indeed, I think many of those arguments are true. I think there's also room for users of cloud to architect their own security, use encryption the right way, in transit, at rest, make sure you understand where the keys are and how they're protected. Basic things that, if implemented right, it can be a very secure solution.
Yes, if the password is on the sticky on the monitor, we cannot help you a whole lot, right? And many times, I mean, what are the big attack vectors? It's either state actors, like really heavy-duty attacks, right? And that's where the cloud is the only line of defense, or it's social engineering or human failure, right? And that's where the organization and your culture has to protect you. That's where the third one is lack of automation, unpatched systems, right? Old piece of software running somewhere. Those are the biggest vectors. And you need to have all three, right? If one door is unlocked, it doesn't help you if two others are.
So you talked a little bit about lifestyle change and really to drive adoption. So what, in your view, do the banks need to do differently to be able to enable that from an operating model perspective?
Speed up, right? And I'm not kidding, right? In the end, is the digital world, well, security is about being fast, right? Because you can patch fast. Availability is about being fast because you can deploy and fail over very quickly. And innovating is also about being fast, because innovating in the end is not about who's the best guesser, but it's about who's the fastest learner. So it does at the end very much come down to speed.
It has successful cloud adoption has a really big impact on the target operating model of the bank, not only the IT organization, the bank, because we're not only talking about compute or containers or cloud native PaaS, we're also talking about SaaS adoption. In fact, most of the adoption of of cloud is in fact SaaS, not IaaS or CaaS. So it has an important impact on the target operating model. Closer to home, if you're an infrastructural department in a bank and you move to the cloud, you need to think differently. And you need to organize yourself not towards products, as typically banks are organized towards products, but towards services. Because what you are is basically an extension of a CSP. Yeah? And you need to be organized in a similar way. So that's what we call, engineering ops. And that has huge implications for typical infrastructure organizations. To think, to organize yourself service-oriented, to think service-oriented, and have the skills in-house to manage that hybrid capability, which is far more complex than the typical infrastructural world where you come from. Especially, and I think that's the biggest change, you move from an hardware world, where your load balancer is still a piece of kit, to a software world where your complete stack from compute, storage, network, all the way up to containers and cloud native capabilities become all software defined. Yeah. And that has huge implications for the engineers who typically are more with their head in an infrastructural world.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts, Evangelos?
I would, just to summarize it, I would say large organizations need to fight the resistance to these things, right? There's still internal resistance to cloud and so on. People need to fight that. And the resistance needs to be replaced with thoughtfulness around how we adopt it, right? It's coming, it's inevitable, it's inescapable. How do we adopt it securely, safely, in a way that drives our competitive advantages?
Great. Thank you. With that, I'd like to thank you three for your time, for this valuable conversation. And thanks, everybody, for joining us today.
And the front row is still awake.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.